China has extended its tentacles into the Canadian government and has kidnapped Canadian citizens. But some people in Canada are fighting back. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Elite capture. It's one of the key ways the authoritarian Chinese Communist Party gets a liberal democracy to do its bidding. It's been happening around the world. But today we have a special guest joining us who has seen just how elite capture can change a government's policy and put that nation's citizens' lives at risk. Joining me today is Garnett Genuis, a Canadian federal parliament member and shadow minister for multiculturalism and Canada-China relations. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, my pleasure. It's great to be with you.
Definitely. So, standing up to the Chinese Communist Party, that's not something I usually think about when I hear Canada. But you've been very outspoken about the CCP. Why is that?
Well, this is a critical issue for Canada and for the world right now. For your non-Canadian audience, they may not be as familiar with, but we're dealing with the situation of two Canadians, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, who are quite well known in Canada. But there are other cases, such as that of Hussein Chalil and Fan Wei, Canadians that are unjustifiably detained in China as part of sort of hostage diplomacy. They're trying to extract concessions from Canada. And there are many other challenging issues in the relationship, similar to what other countries are dealing with. Questions about how we respond to human rights abuses, questions about infiltration, questions about technology security and Huawei, lots of issues that are of concern. And you look at the debate happening in Canada right now, and we do see a real divide. In the U.S., there's more, I think, bipartisan consensus around responding to the CCP. In Canada, there's a little bit more of a partisan divide. So these are some of the key issues that confront us, and trying to deal with, in particular, the fact that there's some political elites that are always keen to give the Chinese government line in conversation.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. The Chinese Communist Party works really hard to make foreign countries have a Beijing-friendly attitude, and they do this through what's called elite capture. So that's getting influential people in a country to essentially repeat the party line. So how successful has the CCP been at elite capture in Canada?
Well, it's difficult to quantify precisely, but I think you can observe, if you look at the debate that's happening, the kind of disparate response that certain elites have compared to what most people feel in response to the things that are going on, and that raises some red flags. So the I think automatic response of normal people when they see our citizens kidnapped overseas is to ask, what do we need to do to protect ourselves and confront this violent political actor that is using hostage diplomacy? That's most people's response. But then the response from some elites is to say, okay, well, we have to make concessions right away in order for things to go back to normal, as if making concessions today in response to hostage diplomacy is somehow not going to lead to the continuing use of this tactic in the future. I think again, most normal people, and if you look at the polling, are very concerned about the growing influence of the Communist Party of China, and in particular, they look at some of the gross abuses of Canadian sovereignty and Canadian citizens, and they want a stronger response. But at the same time, you have situations like our former ambassador, John McCallum, emphasizing a sort of appeasement type approach, people calling for a prisoner exchange, exchanging a Chinese national who was lawfully arrested on an international extradition warrant from the United States, somehow that we would exchange that for Canadians that were taken hostage on no credible legal basis. So I think you see in the kinds of bad arguments that some elites use to justify concessions to China, I think you see evidence of some of that elite capture.
Mm-hmm. And just to sort of talk about the elephant or panda in the room, that photo shoot of Trudeau with the baby pandas. What's that?
I think if you look at various Canadian governments over time, look, there is an effort to have dialogue and relationships, and we want to be able to have that to some extent. I don't think the exchange of pandas is in and of itself problematic, but the Liberal government that we have right now has not really had a good filter in terms of knowing what areas of engagement are in our interest and what areas are not. We're the only Five Eyes country that has yet to say a firm no to Huawei. We have been very slow to react to growing evidence of Chinese state influence and interference here in Canada. There have been instances of Chinese state-backed intimidation on university campuses that we have not responded effectively to. There are many of these issues impacting our own rights and freedoms, our own security, that require a response, and that's where we're trying to focus our attention, to push back on the government's naivete with respect to China and call for a more measured, more thoughtful, more sophisticated approach.
Well, so Trudeau has refused those sort of the prisoner exchange kind of idea of Meng Wanzhou for the two Michaels. Do you think this is marking sort of a change in position of the Liberal government?
Well, it's hard to say, because I think often we see inconsistent messages from the government on security and on our relationship with the Chinese government more broadly. Trudeau came into office championing a supposed golden age of Canada-China government relations, talking about a free trade deal, even at one time talking about an extradition deal between Canada and China. Totally outrageous as a concept with a country that doesn't have the respect for the rule of law. But this is kind of where things started, and then with the hostage taking of the two Michaels and some other events around retaliation for the legitimate arrest of Meng Wanzhou, there has been a change in the tenor of that relationship, obviously. But the government of Canada has been very slow to recognize that and respond. The most recent example was an announcement that our embassies had been planning on buying technology from NukTech, a Chinese state-owned firm, providing security infrastructure for our embassies. And that's obviously absurd, right? That we would be hiring a Chinese state-owned company to provide security infrastructure for our embassies abroad. That's the definition of asking the fox to guard the henhouse. So the government is obviously right to not offer to trade Meng Wanzhou for the two Michaels. That would just put more Canadians at risk. It would incentivize this hostage diplomacy in the future. But the problem with the government's approach on this is that they just failed to send the right signals from the beginning. Our previous ambassador, John McCallum, other senior Liberals have made comments in public and various statements to various audiences that have undermined any effort to send a consistent message to the government of China that we will not accept hostage diplomacy. When you have senior Liberals telling the government that they should back down on this file, perhaps understandably, the Chinese government draws the conclusion that they're making some headway, that they're pushing is working, and the government needs to be resolute in saying no to hostage diplomacy, and they also need to take other steps to protect ourselves. When you have these elites, generally senior Liberals, that are sending contrary messages, when the former ambassador was talking in the way that he did, a former Liberal minister, it unfortunately really undermines the message that we need to be sending.
Yeah, I mean, it's been, 2 years since the two Michaels were detained, and still they're imprisoned in China. It's not quite 2 years, but approaching that. And in the last few months, no consular access as well. There's the case of Hussein Chalil, who's been detained in China for over a decade, and he has not had any consular visits during that time. So there's just a total disregard for basic international norms from the Chinese Communist Party, and we need to wake up to that. It's something that
requires a policy response in terms of protecting ourselves. I've called for example, the government to put in place tough new legislation to deal with foreign interference, similar to what the Australian government has put in place. We need to say no to Huawei. We need to say no to nuke tech. We need to recognize the genocide happening against Uyghurs. We need to take some of these just necessary steps to defend our values and our interests, recognizing that the Chinese state does not follow normal international norms, and they are doing what they can to infiltrate and influence the direction of our politics. So we need to protect ourselves.
Well, I think I might have an idea of what the answer to this next question will be, but at the end of 2019, a committee was created to reevaluate all aspects of Canada's relationship with China. So why does the relationship need to be reevaluated?
Well, I'll just say for other legislators, people in other countries around the world, this model of a special committee looking at all aspects of the relationship with the government of China has been a very effective model for us. It's given us an opportunity to bring light and attention to a broad range of issues, and it's not just foreign affairs, it's not just human rights. There are so many different dimensions to this. There's foreign affairs, there's human rights, there's security, there's trade issues. There's questions around the domestic policy environment. How do we prevent elite capture and infiltration at universities, in media? There are so many different dimensions that having a kind of focused parliamentary committee looking at these issues through a broad range of lenses has worked very well for us. Unfortunately, Parliament was suspended for most of the last 6 months due to the COVID pandemic. Some committees were meeting online, but I think, frankly, because of all the things we were bringing to light through that committee, the Liberals had initially opposed that committee being able to meet digitally, which made it difficult for it to meet during COVID. Eventually, we were able to get support for it to meet digitally, but then just a few weeks ago, the government shut down all committee work by proroguing Parliament, which effectively has killed that committee. So we're going to have to try to bring it back when Parliament resumes at the end of September. Parliamentary scrutiny of what the government is doing on China is so important, and the fact that our current Liberal government in Canada has been reluctant to allow that committee to do its work has created some problems, but nonetheless, it's a minority parliament. We've had the support of other opposition parties, and we're going to do our best to press on and undertake that reevaluation.
Seems very strange. Do you think the coronavirus has changed how most people in Canada think and talk about China?
Yes, it has. I think there's growing awareness. There was before COVID-19 hit, but it's really accelerated that level of awareness. The fact that in the early days of response, there was a lot of misinformation, intentional repression of discussion about the virus on Chinese social media, and that repressive response, instead of trying to get to the bottom of it, that repressive response was what allowed the pandemic to reach the proportion that it did. Certainly, other countries maybe could have reacted better, but the misinformation that we had from the beginning really set us back. And people are aware of that, as much as elites wish to downplay it. Some of our elites, I mean, our health minister in Canada at one time was speaking positively about the quality of the data coming out of China. Our ambassador to China, Dominic Martin, had praised the Chinese government response to coronavirus. So there's still a disconnect between the elites and where everyday people are at, but there's an awareness, I think, because of what's happened with COVID-19, that what happens in China, the lack of human rights, the repression of discussion, the approach to health, that doesn't just impact people there, that impacts people here in Canada and impacts people all over the world. When you have a pandemic that started in China but is spread around the world, that I think has an effect of helping people just bring into focus that the security dimension is so important, and that what happens in China can impact our own security, our own well-being, and of course our own economy as well.
Well, I know the US-China policy has changed a lot since 2017. Has this affected the Canadian government's policy on China in any way?
Well, I think that as Canadians looking at U.S. politics, one of the challenges is that the current administration has been taking a tougher line on China, but it's also tried to be tougher on America's allies. So at the same time as President Trump is challenging things China's doing, he's also imposed, I would argue, unjustified trade measures against Canada. So although I welcome the sort of bipartisan efforts to strengthen America's response to the government of China, recognize some of the risks in that relationship, I would encourage American politicians to see the value of building coalitions, of working constructively with allies, and of not doing things that kind of needlessly embitter or provoke other countries with whom they would benefit from cooperation. I think what we need to have is strong multinational cooperation among like-minded countries, working together, sharing best practices, protecting our security, advancing our belief in pluralism, rule of law, and human rights. I think the United States, Canada, and the UK have worked together on certain things, but we need to broaden those coalitions to include Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, of course, Australia, New Zealand. We need to find more partners who we can work collaboratively with. So we, in Canada, we watch the shift in discussion in the United States. We want to see, obviously, that shift be bipartisan. I know there are Republicans and Democrats that are a part of that, and we should be working collaboratively as much as possible as democracies.
How should a liberal democracy treat a powerful authoritarian government like China?
Well, I think the first step is protecting ourselves. So, 20 years ago, when confronted with the challenge of terrorism, we, as liberal democracies, had to develop new policy frameworks to respond to that challenge, and it wasn't easy. We had to finally tune and calculate, how to preserve our freedoms while also protecting ourselves from this threat. Today, the biggest security threat that democracies face is foreign infiltration by state-backed actors, most prominent among them China. And we need new legislation, new policy frameworks that preserve our freedoms while protecting ourselves from foreign infiltration and influence. It's what that title of that famous book from a few years ago called a silent invasion. It's not a kind of traditional roll up on the beaches type of invasion, but it's an invasion of our societies through institutions, through efforts to co-opt our elites, co-opt universities, co-opt media, etc. And our response needs to be to look for new policy frameworks to protect ourselves from those kinds of influences while preserving our freedom. I think the top issue on a lot of people's minds in this relationship is preserving that security. I think beyond that, we need to recognize the importance of international law and human rights. My grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, and I look at what's happening to the Uyghur Muslims in Western China. This is, as Adrian Zenz told a parliamentary committee, the largest mass detention of a minority since the Holocaust. This meets most, if not all, of the criteria for a genocide, and countries need to recognize this genocide. They need to call it out, and they need to impose sanctions and address the issues in our supply chains that are associated with this, so that we're not buying products that are produced through slave labor and produced in concentration camps. So, first priority is security. Secondly, we need to address human rights. And on the trade front, we need to think about our strategic dependency on China. When we are in a situation where we're dependent in terms of trade, dependent for key products, so that trade retaliation leaves us less vulnerable to respond, we need to broaden our trade and our cooperation with like-minded democratic partnerships, like-minded democratic countries, to reduce our strategic dependency on China. So I think Canada can, instead of pursuing the ever elusive possibility of greater trade with China that just leaves us more vulnerable. I think we should focus our attention on expanding trade and cooperation with other countries in the region. We need a coherent Indo-Pacific strategy that strengthens our engagement in Asia with like-minded democracies. So those are some of the things that would be first on our agenda.
Do you have any specifics for how Canada can take a stronger economic stance against the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, I mean, in terms of economics, I think we should. It's a question of focus, right? I think we should be seeking to have greater trade with like-minded democracies, and ensuring that through that expansion of trade relationship, we can rely on the quality of products we get, and we're not vulnerable to trade retaliation being used against us at sort of sensitive points. Canada was part of the TPP that unfortunately the U.S. Pulled out of, and I think there is an opportunity on the trade front as well as on other fronts to promote greater cooperation among like-minded democracies.
Well, I imagine a lot of Canada's financial elite probably are pretty financially tied to China. How do you think they will form opposition to these kind of moves?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that all of the evidence suggests that that while that the trade hasn't been a major boon for Canada, but there are some people who have done very well off trade with China, and so there's going to be people that are opposed to it, obviously, but this is what's right for Canada, right for our security, right for our interests, and we need to face that down. I will say, though, at the same time, just to be clear, I mean, our party is not opposed to trading relationships with China. I think oftentimes those trading relationships can provide an opening for engagement and dialogue. It's just that we have to be hard-headed about that trade. We have to recognize that the reason that China trades with us is not sort of as some act of charity, but because it's in their interest to trade with us. So when there are threats of retaliation, we need to say, well, we need to stand by our principles, and we're not going to sacrifice our principles. And by the way, we have other alternatives. It's just important that we're not, let's say, too dependent, that we have those alternatives and that we're cultivating them.
So do you think your grandmother's experience as a Holocaust survivor predispose you to having a more critical eye to an authoritarian government like the Chinese Communist Party as compared to maybe some others in Canada?
Well, I mean, I think people come to human rights issues from different experiences and different perspectives. Certainly, that's my experience. As coming, again, as the grandson of a Holocaust survivor, I can see the parallels, right? I can see the parallels in terms of the violence, the parallels in terms of the structure of the system. It's a authoritarian, one-party, ultra-nationalist, aggressive, genocidal political reality, and that's something that we've seen before, and that's something that I don't think people would like to see, and it's easy to kind of pretend or wish these things away, right? To say, oh, it's not really that bad. We don't want another Cold War. We don't want conflict. And I don't want these things either. But I think we have to recognize just the reality of what the strategic agenda of the CCP is. And we need to respond to that agenda in a way that protects ourselves, that protects our interests, and defends our values.
Well, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to speak with us. I think all the Americans will be very interested to hear about what's been going on in Canada.
My pleasure, and look forward to when we're able to open the border again so that we can be interacting with our friends south of the border again and continue these conversations in a different, maybe in-person format. This is a critically important time for the relationship with China, and I'll just say I'm part of IPAC, Interparliamentary Alliance on China, a network of legislators from around the world that are working on these issues, and I would strongly support a similar alliance of governments working on these issues as well. We need cooperation among like-minded countries on this. This isn't something that Canada can do alone. This isn't something that the United States can do alone. We benefit from all being able to work together and address this real serious challenge to our values and our way of life in the 21st century.
Well, it's been great having you on. Thanks.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.